I adored everything about Marlene. That wasn't just something I told people. I felt it. In the spaces between our words, in the quiet habits we built over the years. We'd been married 11 years, and despite the routine of work, bills, and the growing silence that creeps into long-term relationships, I still looked at her like she was the girl from our first date. The one who ordered pancakes for dinner and challenged the waiter to a coin toss to see if dessert was justified. I married her because she made me feel alive. Simple as that. But life isn't static. Feelings don't vanish overnight, but sometimes they shift. And the strange thing is, I never saw the change coming. It wasn't in a fight. It wasn't in a forgotten birthday or a suspicious message. It was in something far smaller, far quieter, something so subtle that it almost slipped past me. That afternoon, I was just returning from the pharmacy. I'd picked up her allergy meds, something I always remembered, even when she didn't. She was waiting in the car, parked in our driveway, scrolling through her phone with that usual distant look people get when they're mentally somewhere else. I didn't think much of it. I got in the driver's seat, passed her the small white bag, and she gave me this half-smile. It wasn't dismissive. It wasn't fake. But it wasn't hers either. That smile, it froze something inside me. I can't explain why. It just didn't belong. Like when you hear someone laugh and realize they're not laughing with you, they're laughing past you. We didn't talk much on the way to her sister's house. She kept staring out the window, texting occasionally. I was asking about dinner plans, but her responses were clipped. Not cold, but distracted. Like her body was there, but her thoughts were already living in another version of the evening that didn't include me. Still, I brushed it off. We all have days where our minds wander. Maybe work was stressful. Maybe her sister needed something. Maybe I was just overthinking. It wasn't until later that night, when I came back out to the car for my wallet, that the moment came back. The passenger seat still had the imprint of where she'd been sitting, and her phone charger was dangling slightly, as if she'd left in a hurry. The air smelled faintly of her perfume, sweet, calming, and yet, there was something else lingering in the silence. I sat down, staring at the dashboard, replaying that smile in my head over and over. Why did it feel so off? Why did something as small as that unsettle me more than any argument ever had? And then it hit me, not as a sudden realization, but as a quiet ache in my chest. That smile, it was practiced, familiar, but not for me. That was the moment I felt the shift. I didn't know what it meant yet. I didn't want to assume. I wasn't the paranoid type. But something about her had changed, and for the first time in over a decade, I wasn't sure if I knew who she really was anymore. I went to bed that night pretending everything was normal, but inside, I was already bracing myself. For what? I didn't yet know. But I would soon find out. And it would change everything. You ever have a moment so small, so quiet, that it clings to your mind louder than anything anyone has ever screamed at you? That's what that smile did. It wouldn't leave me alone. Not that night. Not the next day. I went to work, sat through meetings, nodded through conversations about budget timelines and onboarding strategies, and all the while, that 3-second glance, the way her lips curved without reaching her eyes, kept showing up like static in the back of my thoughts. I didn't bring it up. I didn't want to sound insecure. God knows, I've seen enough people ruin good things just because they didn't know how to live with silence. And to be honest, I didn't have proof that anything was wrong. It wasn't a text I wasn't supposed to see, or some lipstick-stained shirt moment. It was just a pause, between her looking at me and looking through me. That weekend, we drove out to this quiet spot near Miller's Lake. It used to be our place. We'd bring cheap wine and those awful folding chairs that never sat evenly on the ground. I packed everything like I always did. Cheese, crackers, the wine she liked, a book she once told me she wanted to reread. She didn't react much when I suggested it. Just said, yeah, sure, that could be nice. But she didn't dress like she used to when we'd go there. No oversized hoodie. No comfy jeans. She wore something more polished, more styled. Her hair was straightened. Her makeup was a little heavier. She looked stunning. But not for me. And then came another moment, just like the one in the car. We were sitting by the water. I said something dumb. Something about how the trees looked like they were gossiping to each other in the wind, and she laughed. But halfway through the laugh, she stopped. Not because it wasn't funny, but because, I swear, she remembered something. Someone. And then it was gone. Her eyes drifted off. And for the first time, I didn't follow her gaze. I just watched her face. Watched how still it became. how empty the space between us suddenly felt. She checked her phone 3 times in the next 20 minutes. She wasn't even trying to hide it. And every time she did, she tilted the screen away from me slightly. Not enough to be obvious. Just enough to know she was thinking about whether I noticed. I did. I noticed everything. But again, I didn't say anything. Because saying something would have made it real. And maybe that's the most dangerous part of love. Sometimes you'd rather doubt yourself than doubt them. That night, after she fell asleep early with her back turned toward me, I walked out to the porch with a blanket and just sat there in the dark. The sky was full of stars, the air was crisp, and I felt like I didn't belong inside that house anymore. Like it wasn't mine. Like I was staying in a memory that hadn't caught up with reality. And for the first time since the day I married her, I had a thought I never expected to have. What if I'm not the one she comes home to anymore? Just the one she returns to? I didn't sleep that night. I listened. Listened to the house creak. Listened to the way she shifted under the covers. Listened to the sound of my own heartbeat, slowly reshaping into something it had never been before. A question. And once a question like that takes root, it doesn't go away. The days didn't get louder. They just got quieter in the wrong places. You know how it is when someone you love walks into the room and there's a certain shift? That breathless pause, where your eyes meet and no one says anything, but it means everything? We used to have that. Not always, but often enough that I trusted it. Like a quiet language only we spoke. That language was disappearing. Marlene still did all the things a loving wife might do. She'd ask me how work was, remind me to take my vitamins, leave folded laundry on my side of the bed like always. But it felt transactional now. Mechanical. As if she was following choreography she no longer believed in. And the worst part? I started matching her energy. I became polite. Careful. I stopped reaching for her hand when we passed each other in the kitchen. Not because I didn't want to, because I didn't want to feel her pull away. That's when I realized how far we drifted. I was afraid of touching my own wife. There was one night, it must have been a Thursday. I was lying on the couch, half watching a rerun of some home renovation show, the kind she usually rolls her eyes at. I heard her upstairs laughing. This light, open laugh I hadn't heard in months. It was sharp and sincere, and it made me sit up without even realizing. For a second, I felt hopeful. Like maybe she was watching something funny. Maybe the stress had lifted. Maybe she was coming back to herself. Maybe she was coming back to me. But then I heard her voice. Muffled. Playful. Too playful. I stood there, one foot on the stairs, trying not to be the guy who spies on his wife. Trying not to jump to conclusions. I didn't even want to hear what was being said. I just wanted to believe it wasn't what I thought it was. But my gut wouldn't cooperate. It twisted with something I hadn't felt in a long time, fear. Not fear of being left. Fear of already being gone, without even knowing when it happened. I didn't go up. I couldn't. I walked outside instead, barefoot, shirtless, into the cool night air. I stood in the driveway, looking at her car, sitting exactly where she had smiled at me days earlier. That same car. That same seat. That same woman, who I now realized I didn't fully recognize anymore. And that's when I noticed something strange. There was a smudge on the inside of the windshield, perfectly centered in front of the passenger seat. A soft circle, like someone had leaned forward and breathed on the glass. But it wasn't for me. I hadn't sat there since I cleaned the windows last Sunday. Marlene hadn't mentioned anyone riding with her. And yet, it was there. Fresh. Out of place. Unexplained. It could have meant nothing. But in that moment, it meant everything. I touched it gently, like the answer would be hidden in the warmth. But it was already cold. Just like us. I think I used to be a part of her plans. That thought came to me one morning as I poured coffee into her favorite mug, the one with the chipped handle she refuses to throw out. She used to joke that it had survived more mornings than most couples, and I'd always laugh, even though it wasn't that funny. But on that particular morning, as the coffee steam curled into the quiet kitchen, it hit me. I hadn't been in any of her plans for a while. Not her calendar. Not her weekends. Not even her questions. She still asked how I slept. But it was the kind of question that people ask at the grocery store checkout. A sentence without gravity. Something to fill the air between two people who used to share everything. I only started noticing it after that night I saw the smudge on the windshield. Something about that moment, that still, invisible trace of someone who wasn't me. It didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like a signature. And once you start looking for signatures, you start seeing them everywhere. I never went through her phone. That's not who I am. I didn't follow her. Didn't check her pockets. I didn't have to. Her absence didn't need proof. It had weight. It pressed into the walls of our house, into the silences between her footsteps, into the growing space between our dinner conversations. One Saturday afternoon, I was looking for printer paper in the small cabinet next to her desk. That's when I saw it, her planner, slightly open. I don't know why I flipped through it. Maybe I just wanted to see if I showed up anywhere. I wasn't looking for secrets, just my own name. But it wasn't there. Monday, Pilates/grocery pickup. Wednesday, Zoom with Kate. Friday, afternoon, blocked off, smiley face. That smiley face, it made me freeze. Not because it was suspicious, but because it felt too personal. Like a private joke that didn't include me. She never used smiley faces in our notes. That was never her style. Our little jokes were dry, sarcastic. This was someone else's rhythm. And then, something even smaller caught my eye. Tucked in the back cover was a photo. A printed one. Folded. It wasn't scandalous. Just a shot of her at a winery, sunlight spilling over her hair, laughing in a way I hadn't seen in what felt like years. The thing is, I didn't take that photo. I'd never even been to that place. That's when my heart did this thing. Not a drop. Not a break. It just paused. I stared at that picture for a long time, waiting for some kind of answer to arrive in my chest. But there was only this hollow, familiar truth. She had a life I knew nothing about. Not secret. Just separate. I didn't confront her. I didn't even mention it. I just slid the planner back into place, printed what I needed, and went back downstairs. That night, while brushing my teeth, I looked at her reflection in the mirror. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, scrolling her phone, her face lit up with soft blue light. She didn't look guilty. She didn't look anything. She looked peaceful, like someone who was already somewhere else. And in that moment, I realized something that stung in a quiet, complicated way. She wasn't hiding anything from me. She just didn't feel the need to share it anymore. There's something no one tells you about losing a person who's still right next to you. It's not a moment. It's a series of almosts. Almost laughter. Almost warmth. Almost love. You don't wake up and realize it's over. You just wake up one day and realize you've been pretending it's not. Lately, I've been clinging to the small things, hoping one of them would anchor me back into place. The shared grocery list. The way she still signed birthday cards with both our names. The cup of chamomile she made me every time I coughed more than once. It was all still there, every thread. But none of it held tension anymore. It was like being wrapped in a blanket that looked the same but no longer kept me warm. One evening, I came home from work a little earlier than usual. It was raining, and the lights inside the house glowed soft and golden through the windows. For a split second, pulling into the driveway, I felt something. Nostalgia, maybe. That fleeting, bitter flavor of remembering who we used to be. I opened the front door and was immediately struck by the smell of her perfume, floral, layered, and too strong to be old. She wasn't in the living room or the kitchen. Her bag was on the counter, her coat still damp. I called her name softly, not wanting to sound startled. She answered from upstairs. Just one word. Hey. It sounded cheerful. Empty. I told her I'd brought dinner, Thai from that place she loved near Oakwood. She came down a few minutes later, hair damp from a quick rinse, wearing one of those soft cashmere pullovers she only wore when she wanted to be cozy. But again, something didn't line up. Her cheeks were flushed. She was fidgety, a little too quick with her words. Not guilty. Not suspicious. Just unsettled. We ate in the dining room, across from each other, with a candle burning between us like we were guests at our own table. I asked about her day. She told me a story about a meeting at work and someone spilling coffee on a keyboard. I laughed. She smiled. But her eyes didn't. And halfway through the conversation, she dropped her fork and let out this tiny, nervous giggle that didn't fit. Sorry, she said. I've just had one of those weird, dizzy days. You ever get those? I nodded. But I knew what dizziness really was. It wasn't fatigue. It was adrenaline. It was the body's way of reacting when it's doing something new. Something it's hiding. I didn't say that out loud. After dinner, I offered to clean up. She disappeared upstairs again, said she had a call with her sister. I stood at the sink for a long time after the dishes were done, hands wet, water running, not moving. Just listening. Not eavesdropping. Just waiting for her voice to reach me from the hallway. It didn't. When I finally went up, the bedroom door was open. She was on the bed, reading. No phone in sight. You didn't talk to your sister? I asked gently. She looked up, caught off guard for a split second too long, then smiled. No, she had to reschedule. She's swamped. Something in my chest pulsed. Not pain, not anger, just recognition. I was watching her build scaffolding for a story she hadn't constructed well enough. And I was nodding like it made perfect sense. That night, she fell asleep early again. Her breathing slowed. Her hand twitched in that way it always did in the first minutes of sleep. I watched her, not because I suspected her, but because I missed her. I missed her even though she was right there. I got up, careful not to wake her, and walked over to the corner of our bedroom, where we kept this old antique lamp she'd found at a flea market during our 3rd year together. She'd set it, made the room feel like a secret. And she was right. It always cast a soft shadow behind the mirror near the dresser. Only this time, when I glanced up, I noticed something wedged behind the mirror's edge, just barely poking out. A folded slip of paper. I didn't touch it. I didn't want to, but I couldn't stop looking at it either. What would it be? A receipt? A letter? A note she meant to throw away and forgot? Or something that would confirm every quiet doubt that had been multiplying inside me like mold in a dark room? I stood there for several long minutes, frozen, not from fear, but from the certainty that once I reached for it, everything would change. So I didn't. I turned off the lamp, crawled back into bed, and stared at the ceiling until dawn painted cracks in the dark. And as she stirred beside me, stretching and sighing softly like everything was fine, I realized something even worse than losing her. I was losing myself. I didn't take the note behind the mirror. I think that matters. It's strange how we sometimes choose to remain in the fog, not because we want to be lied to, but because we want to believe that the things we love are still real. The illusion, the repetition, the familiar routine, it's a kind of protection. And I clung to it, even as it thinned into something I could see through. But it didn't stop time, or moments, or words, misplaced and irreversible. It was a Wednesday, middle of the week. Nothing special about it. She was making tea in the kitchen, wearing that faded green t-shirt she always said she hated but never actually threw away. I was setting down the mail on the counter, water bill, some random flyer from the hardware store, and I asked, without thinking, "Do you want to have dinner with my parents this weekend?" She didn't even hesitate. "Oh," she said, turning slightly. "Let me check with Michael." The mug slipped from her hand and clattered into the sink. Empty, unbroken. Her face froze. I didn't say anything. Neither did she. For the span of maybe 3 seconds, time folded in on itself. Then she blinked. Swallowed. "I meant Marcus. My manager. He's trying to finalize the work schedule." Her voice cracked just slightly on the word manager. And that was the exact moment I knew I had stepped out of the script we'd both been pretending to still follow. She turned away, busied herself with a towel, and asked what kind of wine my mom liked again. I answered. I don't even remember what I said, but something inside me had already changed. The name didn't matter. The correction didn't matter. What mattered was the reflex. The fact that the name she reached for first wasn't mine, or her boss's, or her brother's. It was someone else. Someone embedded deeply enough to slip out when her guard was down. I didn't confront her. Because honestly, I didn't want a performance. I didn't want panic or apologies or explanations shaped to sound like reassurance. I wanted to see what she did next when I didn't ask anything at all. The next morning, she was all softness and smiles. Made pancakes. Played that acoustic playlist she used to put on when we first moved in together. She kissed me on the cheek before I left for work, something she hadn't done in weeks. But none of it felt like a return. It felt like a cover-up. Later that evening, I came home and found her sitting on the couch with a book in her lap, unread. The TV was on mute. The wine bottle open, only one glass poured. I walked in, dropped my keys in the bowl, and sat next to her. "How was your day?" I asked. She answered too quickly. "Fine. Quiet." She asked about mine. I told her the truth. I kept thinking about a name all day. Her body stiffened. Barely, but enough. A name. Yeah, Michael. She didn't flinch. She just stared straight ahead at the muted TV, where someone was holding a suitcase and crying in slow motion. "I used to think I knew every name that mattered in your life," I said. "Now I'm not sure I'd even recognize the ones that do." She didn't speak. Not right away. After a long pause, she looked at me, really looked, and said, "You don't need to be afraid of everything changing." I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because I didn't know how to tell her it already had. We didn't talk about Michael again. She didn't bring it up, and I didn't press. It became a shared silence, not cold, not hostile, just suspended. Like a painting that had been crooked for weeks and neither of us wanted to fix it, because that would mean admitting it had ever been straight in the first place. What changed next wasn't dramatic. It was spatial. I started noticing the space between us. Not metaphorically. Literally. On the sofa, she used to sit tucked into me, knees under her, head tilted against my shoulder while we watched some crime documentary or cooking show we'd pretend to care about. But now, the angle of her body was always slightly away from mine. Just enough. Her chair at the dining table was pulled a little farther back than before. Her perfume no longer lingered in the hallway, not because she'd stopped wearing it, but because I'd stopped noticing it. One night I got home a little late. Not terribly so. Maybe 7:15. The house was dim, quiet. I called out, expecting to find her in the kitchen or upstairs. Instead, I found her sitting alone in the den, that small side room we never really used. She was reading by a floor lamp, legs crossed, a blanket over her knees, her phone face down on the side table. There was something about the way she looked up at me, calm, composed, that made me pause. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't guilt. It was distance, well practiced. "Hey," she said, folding the page. "I didn't hear you come in. You're in here?" I asked, glancing around the room like it might offer a reason. "Since when do we use this room?" She shrugged. "I don't know. I like the light in here." The light. That's what she said. But the truth was harder to name. It was the only room in the house where we had never built a memory together. No birthdays. No movie nights. No slow dancing after too much wine. It was neutral ground. And that, I realized, had become her comfort zone. She didn't invite me to sit. I didn't insist. Instead, I walked upstairs, and for the first time in over a decade, I closed the bedroom door behind me. Not because I was angry. Not because I needed space. But because I no longer knew whether I was still welcome in her presence. And that shift, that quiet uncertainty, carved a deeper hollow in me than any loud fight ever could. That weekend, I went out alone. I told her I needed air, and she didn't ask where I was going. Just nodded and said, "Take your time." I ended up at the waterfront, sitting on a bench we hadn't visited in years. I watched couples pass by, some holding hands, some arguing quietly, some moving in complete silence. But even in their tension, I could feel it. They were still tethered. I couldn't remember the last time I felt tethered to her. Not emotionally. Not even spiritually. Physically. She had become someone I moved around, like furniture I was too nostalgic to donate. The wind picked up, and I reached into my coat pocket for my phone. I didn't call anyone. I just scrolled through photos, our anniversary trip to Maine, her messy hair on the hotel balcony, the goofy face she made at the seafood shack because I wouldn't try oysters. She looked so alive in those photos. And I couldn't tell if she still looked like that now, or if the lens I saw her through had changed so much. I blurred her into someone else entirely. That night, I came home to find the house clean, music playing low, jazz, her favorite. There were 2 wine glasses on the table and a bottle open. She looked at me like nothing had happened. Like we hadn't both slipped away in opposite directions. And I did what I always do. I smiled back. I poured a glass. I listened to the music. And I sat down in a chair turned slightly away from hers. Because that's what we were now. Slightly away. Somewhere in the space between one breath and the next, something softened. It didn't happen after a speech. It wasn't because of a discovery. There was no confrontation, no confessional. It was just stillness. That kind that settles in the body when you stop bracing for something. I had been holding my breath for months, maybe longer than I realized, expecting a final blow that never came. But instead of a shattering, there was a shift. It happened one morning in March. A gray morning, the kind where the sky feels heavier than the trees. I was up before her, sitting on the edge of the bed, just staring at the floor. I hadn't slept. My thoughts had done laps through the usual circuit, questions without answers, moments I kept replaying in slightly altered versions, trying to find something I missed. And for the first time, I didn't feel panic. I felt clarity. I missed her. That much I knew. But more than that, I missed me too. The version of me who laughed loudly, who held eye contact a second longer, who didn't feel like a guest in his own home. And I realized something simple but powerful. If I wanted to find my way back to her, I had to stop standing still, waiting for her to return to me. I had to walk toward her, even if that meant risking the truth. So I did something I hadn't done in months. I asked her to meet me for coffee. Not in the kitchen. Not in our usual morning shuffle of mismatched mugs and distracted glances. I asked her to meet me, like it was a first date, At the little cafe on Maple Street where we used to go before we ever lived together. She paused when I asked. Not because she didn't want to, but because it was unexpected. That Saturday, she showed up right on time. She was wearing a soft sweater, no makeup, hair tied up like she used to when she didn't feel like impressing anyone. And yet, she looked more like herself than I'd seen in a long time. I stood to greet her. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she reached for me first. We didn't talk about the silence that had been living between us. We didn't talk about the name, or the note I never pulled from behind the mirror. We didn't tally wounds or point fingers. Instead, we talked about the barista who still worked there after all these years, the crooked painting on the wall that had somehow never been fixed, and the way life sneaks past you when you're not watching. At one point, she laughed, not a polite laugh, but a full, instinctive one that made her eyes wrinkle at the corners. I must have been staring, because she tilted her head and asked, "What?" I just smiled. "I've missed that." She didn't look away. She didn't shift. She simply reached across the table and rested her hand over mine. "I have too," she said. That moment wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. But it was real. And real, I've learned, is what matters most. We walked home together in the soft drizzle. No umbrella. Just close enough that our shoulders bumped every few steps. And when we got home, we sat in the den, the same den where she used to sit alone, and this time, she pulled her chair a little closer. We didn't fix everything that day, but we stopped drifting. And sometimes, that's how healing begins, not with answers, but with presence. So yes, I adored everything about my wife. And now, finally, I was beginning to adore something else just as much. Us. Again.